The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, when the sky over Vancouver looked like old concrete and the rain had been falling nonstop for 11 straight days. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the streaks of water sliding down the window when my phone buzzed against the wood. The number on the screen wasn't familiar. A 604 area code, but not one I recognized. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "Mr. Calloway?" The voice was calm and professional. A woman. "This is Patricia Newman from Ashford and Newman Legal. I'm calling regarding the estate of Catherine Calloway." I slowly set my coffee cup down. Catherine had been gone for 2 years by then. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. I knew the exact number because I had counted, and in all that time my daughter hadn't spoken a single word to me. "Mr. Calloway, are you still there?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm here. We'll need you to come into the office. There are documents your wife left behind that must be read in person, in the presence of both you and your daughter. I've already contacted Diane, and she's agreed to attend." I almost laughed when I heard that. Diane had agreed, as if sitting in the same room with her father after 2 years of silence was just another appointment, something like a dentist visit you pencil into your calendar and reschedule, if something more interesting appears. "When?" I asked. "Thursday at 10 in the morning, if that works for you." It worked. I had nowhere else to go. I was 63 years old, retired 18 months early from the civil engineering firm where I had spent 27 years of my life. Since then, my days had taken on a hollow routine: morning coffee, a walk along the seawall if the rain allowed it, lunch alone, evenings spent with books I couldn't seem to focus on. I hadn't chosen early retirement because I wanted to. I had chosen it because the alternative was something I still couldn't bring myself to say out loud. Thursday arrived cold, but bright, the rain finally gone. The mountains stood sharp against a clean blue sky the way they sometimes do in late winter, after the air has been completely washed clear. I drove downtown to the office on West Georgia, found parking 2 blocks away, and stayed in the car for nearly 10 minutes before stepping out. I told myself I was just breathing. In truth, I was preparing, not for the paperwork. I had a general sense of what Catherine had arranged, though the details had been handled by Patricia without my involvement, following Catherine's very specific instructions. What I was really preparing for was Diane. She was already there when I entered the office, sitting in one of the chairs outside the conference room, coat still on, hands folded neatly in her lap. She was 41 now. She had inherited her mother's dark hair and the same quiet stillness Catherine used to carry when she was angry, as if holding completely still was its own kind of control. She looked up as the glass door closed behind me. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She just looked at me the way someone looks at a person they've already made their final decision about. "Diane," I said. "Dad." Just the word. Nothing more. We sat together in that waiting area for 4 minutes without speaking. I know because I watched the clock on the wall. Eventually, Patricia Newman stepped out. She was in her 50s, with reading glasses resting on top of her head and a folder tucked beneath her arm. She greeted both of us with a handshake before guiding us into the conference room. Inside was a long table, 2 chairs facing each other, and a large window overlooking the street below. A glass of water had been placed at each seat. I sat on one side. Diane took the chair across from me. Patricia settled at the head of the table. "Thank you both for coming," she said. "I understand this situation isn't easy, and I want to acknowledge that before we begin. Catherine was extremely specific about these instructions. She requested that this meeting take place no earlier than 24 months after her passing, and that both of you be present before anything was read or distributed. I've respected that timeline." Diane kept her eyes on the table. "There are 2 parts to this," Patricia continued. "The first concerns the formal distribution of the estate. The second is a personal letter Catherine wrote, which she asked me to read aloud." She opened the folder. In her own words, and I'm quoting directly, she said, "Don't let either of them leave until they've heard every word." Something flickered across Diane's face. Just for a second. Then it disappeared. "Let's begin with the estate," Patricia said. "I won't pretend the numbers didn't matter. After everything that had happened, the early retirement, the legal expenses, The 18 months of living off savings that were never meant to support me this long alone, the numbers mattered. Catherine had worked for 22 years as a senior project manager at a major Vancouver development firm. She had always been careful with money in ways I didn't fully appreciate until after she was gone. The estate totaled a little over $2.4 million, including the house we had once owned together. The house had been sold 14 months earlier at my request because I couldn't bring myself to keep living there. Patricia explained how Catherine had divided everything. Diane would receive the investment accounts, valued at roughly $1.6 million. I would receive the remaining assets, life insurance proceeds, and a separate account Catherine had kept in her own name, adding up to $800,000. Diane's face didn't change. I suspected she had already known she was the primary beneficiary. What she hadn't known was my portion. "That's it?" Diane asked quietly. "For the financial distribution?" "Yes," Patricia replied. "But now I'd like to read the letter." Diane leaned back slightly in her chair. "How long is it?" 14 pages. Silence settled across the room. "Catherine wrote it over several weeks," Patricia added. "She asked that it be read in full without interruption before either of you responds." She paused and looked between us. "Do you both agree to that?" I nodded. After a moment, Diane nodded too. Patricia opened the folder, slipped on her reading glasses, and began reading. "I don't know what day you'll be hearing this. I tried to imagine it, the two of you sitting across from each other in some office, not looking at one another, both convinced you already understand exactly what happened and exactly who was at fault. I know both of you well enough to believe that's exactly how it will go. But I need you to know something. I'm not writing this letter to place blame. I'm writing it because 6 years ago I made a decision that set everything in motion, and neither of you has ever known the full truth about it. That's on me. I've carried that truth with me ever since, and I decided that whatever time I had left, and by the time you hear this, you'll know it wasn't nearly as much as we hoped, I wasn't going to let it end with the silence that grew between you. So I'm going to tell you what really happened. All of it. After that, what you choose to do with the truth will be up to you." I turned slightly and looked toward the window. Outside, a city bus rolled slowly past the building. Someone on the street below was walking a dog, a yellow lab tugging hard against its leash. Patricia continued reading. This is what Catherine's letter said. 6 years earlier in the spring, I had been nominated for a major infrastructure contract, the biggest opportunity of my career, a proposal my firm had spent 18 months preparing. By any standard, it was the culmination of nearly 30 years of work. The committee reviewing the bid was meeting in Calgary. I flew out on a Wednesday, had dinner with a few colleagues, and returned Thursday evening. What Catherine knew, and what I had no idea she knew, was that one of the competing firms had submitted falsified geological survey data with their proposal. Data that, if properly examined, would have disqualified them immediately. She knew because someone inside that firm had approached her. Not me, not the regulatory board. Catherine. They trusted her, and they were afraid. What Catherine did with that information was something I didn't learn about until 6 years later. According to the letter, she made an anonymous call to a contact at the Provincial Review Board. She reported the falsified data and quietly urged them to investigate before the contract was awarded. It didn't stay quiet. The review board launched a full investigation. My firm became entangled in it, not because we had done anything wrong, but because we were the leading bidder, and the inquiry froze the entire contract process for 7 months. 7 months during which the momentum we had built completely collapsed. 2 junior partners left the firm. I worked 18-hour days trying to keep everything from falling apart, and in the process, I became someone my family barely recognized. During that time, I said things to Catherine that I have never been able to take back. I accused her of not understanding the pressure I was under. I accused her of pulling away. And one night, something I will carry with me for the rest of my life, I told her she was the one person who was supposed to be on my side, and she couldn't even manage that. She never told me what she had done. She never told me why. She simply absorbed it. Eventually, the investigation cleared my firm completely. 9 months later, we were awarded the contract anyway. I had called it the worst year of my professional life and moved forward. Catherine said nothing. What I didn't know, what the letter now revealed in Patricia Newman's calm, steady voice, was that Catherine had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer 4 months before she made that call to the review board. Stage 2. Detected early, treatable. She had gone to that first appointment alone. She hadn't told me because the contract bid was entering its final phase. And sitting in a waiting room at the Vancouver Cancer Center, she decided she wasn't going to add to the pressure I was already carrying. But she made another decision as well. If she was sick, if there was even a small possibility that things might not turn out the way the doctors hoped, she wasn't going to let a dishonest company steal the opportunity I had spent my entire career working toward. She wasn't going to stay silent and let that happen, so she made the call. She did it because she loved me. And afterward she said nothing, because telling me about the call would also mean telling me about the cancer, and she wasn't ready for that. By the time she was ready, by the time she finally told me about her diagnosis, 8 months after that first appointment, I had already spent most of the previous year treating her like a stranger in her own home. Patricia paused and took a sip of water. Diane sat completely still across the table. I couldn't bring myself to look at my daughter. My eyes were fixed on my hands resting flat against the table, hands belonging to a 63-year-old man who had spent decades building bridges and highways and somehow failed to see what was right in front of him. Patricia continued reading. I'm not telling you this so you'll blame your father, Diane. What happened next? The distance, the silence, the way things unraveled between the three of us. That responsibility belongs to me. I should have told him the truth earlier. I chose not to, and I chose not to tell you either, because I didn't want you carrying that burden. But there is something you need to understand about your father. When I finally told him I was sick, when he learned about the diagnosis and realized I had kept it from him for nearly a year, he didn't leave. He didn't pull away. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had argued so many times that year, and he held my hand and said, "Tell me what you need." That's who your father is, Diane. That's the man I married, not the man you saw during the worst year of his professional life, during a time when pressures existed that he never fully understood because I kept him in the dark. Diane made a small sound. I finally looked up. She had her fingers pressed tightly against her mouth. Patricia continued. By the time I retired, Catherine's cancer had progressed to stage 3. The treatments were harsher. I left the firm not because I wanted to, but because Catherine needed someone at home, and I was the one who could make that happen. I arranged it quietly, without explaining why, because Catherine had asked me not to tell anyone. She didn't want coworkers showing up with casseroles. She didn't want Diane, who was living in Calgary at the time, to disrupt her new job and new relationship just to come back to Vancouver and watch her mother get sick. So I told Diane I was taking early retirement. I said the industry was changing, that I was tired. That year, Diane came home for Christmas and noticed her mother had grown thinner than she had ever been. She noticed her father had become quieter in ways she couldn't quite understand. One evening, she asked me directly, "Is something wrong with Mom?" I told her what Catherine had asked me to say, that there were some health issues, and they were managing them, and that Catherine would explain everything, herself, when she felt ready. Catherine never reached that moment. She was never ready before she reached the point where she couldn't tell anyone anything at all. She died the following November, 18 months after that Christmas. Diane was there. I was there. The three of us spent the final 6 weeks together in that house. For 6 weeks, Diane watched her father sit beside her mother's bed, holding her hand. And still she didn't know the whole truth. None of us ever spoke clearly about the year that had broken everything. Not directly, not honestly. When Catherine died, Diane took all that confusion and grief and turned it into something solid she could hold on to. She decided her father was responsible. Not for the cancer, she wasn't irrational, but for the year her mother had been sick without him knowing, for the arguments she had overheard, for the secret Catherine had carried alone. And the only explanation Diane could build in her mind was that I must have been the kind of husband her mother didn't trust with the truth. She said it to me at the funeral, not loudly, just the two of us beside the car. After learning Catherine had been sick for nearly a year before telling me, Diane looked at me and said, "What does it say about you that she couldn't tell you?" I didn't answer. I had been asking myself the exact same question every day since Catherine told me about the diagnosis, and I still didn't have an answer that felt sufficient. Diane returned to Calgary 3 days after the funeral. She called, twice during the following month. Short, cautious conversations that felt like someone testing the ice before deciding it wasn't safe to cross. Then the calls stopped. I didn't know how to begin again. 2 years, 3 months, 16 days. Catherine's letter continued. I'm asking both of you to do something difficult. Take what I've just told you and sit with it for a moment before reacting. I know that's not easy. I know you're sitting in that room right now, and everything probably feels overwhelming. Diane, your father did not fail me. I made choices to protect him and to protect you, because that's what I do. I would probably make those choices again, but I made them alone when I shouldn't have. That part is my responsibility, not his. He was left in the dark by the person who was supposed to be his partner, and he still showed up every single day when it mattered. Douglas, stop carrying the year before I told you. You've been holding on to it ever since the day I shared the diagnosis. I know you have, because that's the kind of man you are. You decided that year proved something about who you were, and you've been punishing yourself for it ever since. But it wasn't proof of anything. It was simply a difficult year. We had many good ones, too. What I want, what I'm asking for, wherever I am while you're hearing this, is for the two of you to leave that office together. Not fixed. I'm not naive enough to ask for that. Just together. Moving in the same direction. The money is practical. It's my way of making sure your father, who stepped away from his career early to stay beside me, doesn't spend his 60s worrying about what he has left. And it's my way of making sure you, Diane, have the stability to build the life you've been working toward these past 3 years. But the letter is what truly matters. The letter is what I really want to leave behind. I love both of you more than you probably know how to accept. I always have. Catherine. Patricia closed the folder. The room fell completely silent. I was staring at my hands again. After a moment, I realized I was crying. Not dramatically, not in a way that draws attention, just quietly, the way water eventually finds its way out when there's been too much pressure inside for too long. I didn't try to stop it. I was 63 years old, and my wife had just spoken to me from 2 years beyond her death, and she had been wiser, more thoughtful, and more loving than I had ever fully understood while she was alive. I heard Diane push her chair back. For a second, I thought she was leaving. She wasn't. Instead, she walked around the table and sat in the chair beside me, not across from me, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. Neither did I. Patricia Newman politely turned her attention toward the window, giving us space. I didn't know, Diane finally said. Her voice sounded different. The careful, flat tone she'd been using earlier was gone. She sounded like herself again, the daughter I remembered, the one who used to call me on Sunday afternoons to argue about hockey and ask for advice she pretended not to want. I didn't know she'd been sick that long. She didn't want you to worry, I said softly. She didn't want either of us worrying. There was a pause. That sounds exactly like her. Yeah, I replied. It does. Diane looked down at the folder on the table. 14 pages, she said. She really had a lot to say. She always did. Diane's voice cracked slightly on that last word. She pressed her hand over her eyes for a moment. Without thinking, I reached over and rested my hand on her arm the way I used to when she was younger. After she fell off her bike or came home from school, hurt by something someone had said. A small, familiar fatherly gesture I hadn't been sure, until that moment, I was still allowed to make. She didn't pull away. We sat there quietly for a while. The sunlight had shifted and now streamed through the window at an angle. Pale winter light, the kind Vancouver seems to save for the rare days when it's trying to make up for weeks of gray skies. I have some things to figure out, Diane said eventually. I just need time. I know, I said. I'm not asking for anything today. I'm not saying I'm still angry. I know that too. She looked at me then, really looked at me, the way she hadn't since I walked into the office. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown with that slight upward tilt at the corners. Right now they looked tired and young at the same time, the way grief can make someone look. She did all of this on purpose, Diane said. The timing, the letter, making us sit in the same room. That sounds like your mother, I said. Planning things from beyond the grave. Diane made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but close enough. She always said she was better at following through than either of us. We stayed there another hour. Patricia eventually brought tea that no one had asked for, set it quietly on the table, and returned to her office. Diane and I talked carefully at first, then gradually with less